And I think there's some people that if they don't understand that you're supposed to love other people and you're supposed to wish other people well, and that life is not about competition, then I don't know.
Today is Saturday, February 27th. The year is 2021. This is No Easy Answers, and I am your host, Jules Taylor. Today, like all days, I have no easy answers for you. Well, thank you for tuning in from wherever you happen to be listening. My name is Jules Taylor, and this is No Easy Answers, and I am so glad to have you with us for today's episode. No Easy Answers is a podcast about politics, philosophy, and the human condition, and we are supported entirely by listeners just like you. So if you like what we do and you want to support us, you can really help us out and help us expand our reach by leaving a 5-star review in Apple Podcast. Or even better, you can leave a few positive words while you're there. If you share these episodes with your social media, it really helps us. Following us on Twitter helps us. We are at noeasyanswerpod. And if you really want to support the show, you can subscribe to our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Thank you to all the Patreon subscribers we have already. All of you make this show possible, and your contributions also provide the inspiration to continue reading, researching, writing, and inviting guests on to help us while we tackle some of these difficult questions that really have no easy answers. So, I don't know about you, but I know that in my family, there are people that have vastly different political and cultural beliefs than me. I mean, most of my family lives in Texas, and I live in New York, but our political differences go beyond just like red state, blue state issues. There's a quote by the dubious character Andrew Breitbart. He says that politics is downstream from culture. And as much as I hate to quote the guy or give him any credit, that statement is really true. I have a friend who politically he's on the far left, right? I mean, like we're talking like anarchism, communist sort of political beliefs. But I am always surprised by the sympathy that he expresses about conservatives in the South. He always says something to the effect of, well, if you grew up in Florida next to an army base with a church on every corner, you might have turned out a Republican too. And I can't say I disagree with my friend. I mean, I think he's got a really good point. I mean, what if your dad's a veteran? Like, let's say your dad is a Vietnam vet and he flies an American flag on the front yard. He's proud that he served, and not only does he have pride in his country, I mean, he's the guy handing you a selective service registration card when you turn 18. And if that sounds a lot like your dad, or if that sounds like your husband, brother, or whomever, that's probably because a lot of Americans out there are just like that person I described. I mean, never in a million years would I expect that person to speak ill about the American imperial project. I mean, that's a person who, while serving his country, he's really bought into all of the narratives of American nationalism. But you can see how the person I've characterized would most likely be a Republican voter, and you can probably imagine that this person and his belief system isn't entirely of his own making. I mean, that goes for a lot of us. Because our mom and dad were very liberal, we tend to vote Democrat. Or because your dad served his country and always voted Republican, now you vote Republican. And a lot of these notions we inherit, like rooting for a regional sports team that, we just root for them because they are from the region where we were born. But this person who is soaking in American ideology, this person that we're describing, I mean, that isn't someone we consider abnormal. Many of us would think like, yeah, this guy is pretty much half the damn country, right? I mean, these ideas, they aren't as far from the center of the political spectrum as we like to think they are. I mean, just as a personal note here, my grandfather, who was an Air Force veteran, he once told me that he admired the way Israel had a conscription for all Israeli citizens when they turn 18. I remember him saying something similar to like, if you want to travel the world, have 3 square meals a day, clothes, shelter, and pick up a little discipline along the way, then you should join the military. I mean, he considered it a good idea. And this was coming from a man who retired as a high school principal, was a proud member of the school board and the teachers union, and voted Democrat at least until the later years of his life. So here we are nearing the end of February, and we're still kind of piecing together the puzzle of what exactly happened on January 6th at the Capitol building. Members of the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, 3%ers, Trump supporters, and QAnon believers took part in the raid, and they're now all being sought by law enforcement, and at last count, something like 250 people have been charged. But remember that one woman who died, shot by Capitol Police? Her name was Ashley Babbitt, and when you take a look at her, she really seems like she's not too far off from that patriotic veteran that we described earlier. I mean, how did someone like Ashley Babbitt, who served in the Air Force for 14 years as a military police officer, she was a co-owner of a pool cleaning business in Spring Valley, California. I mean, how did a person like that get to the point where she was raiding the Capitol building wrapped in a Trump flag? Recently, CNN aired an interview with Enrique Tarrio, who is the leader of the white chauvinist group, the Proud Boys. And I bring this up because the day after the Capitol was raided, he tweeted a picture of senators and representatives hiding from the rioters as they breached the Capitol. Enrique was unapologetic about the events, and he wrote, "When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty." And I think we've all heard that quote before, and a lot of folks misattribute those words to Thomas Jefferson. But if you type those words into a search bar, one of the first results that comes up is the website of Monticello, which is now a museum preserving the estate of Thomas Jefferson. On the website, it says that the quote actually comes from a 1914 debate between noted anti-socialist John Basil Barnhill during a debate. But you know what Thomas Jefferson did say? He did say that thing about the Tree of Liberty needing to be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. But I mean, if you didn't have any knowledge of American history, like no context whatsoever, could you really separate which quotes came from one of the founding fathers, or Thomas Jefferson specifically, and which lines were lifted out of something like Beowulf or The Art of War? I mean, like if you didn't know or have any context about American history, I'm sure a quote like, "The blood of your enemies must be drunk directly from their skull" would seem perfectly normal sitting side by side with the whole Tree of Liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And that's the point. I mean, we are all, because we live in America and we're swimming in ideology, to some degree, we're affected by this sort of American psychosis. This belief that we need to defend the Constitution, that freedom isn't free, and that America is the premier democracy, and that's our obligation to spread our version of democracy around the globe. So how much can we really blame someone like Enrique Tarrio for endorsing the actions of January 6th when these notions of violence and making the government afraid of the people rising up is baked into what America is as a nation and, to some extent, who Americans are as citizens? I mean, it'd be one thing if this American psychosis was only speaking to the need for the bloodshed of tyrants only, right? But, you know, they also, it says specifically the bloodshed of patriots and tyrants. So this nationalism thing isn't just calling for the people to enforce their will upon the government. It's actually calling for the people to be willing to have their blood shed in the name of liberty. So to me, I can really see how someone like Ashley Babbitt could be radicalized. I mean, she was deep in the elements that create this sort of American psychosis. I mean, spending 14 years in the military probably results in one absolute hellhole of an algorithmic bubble. But you know, it's more than that. Perhaps my dear listeners are saying something like, okay, you know, patriotism, sure. Ashley Babbitt believed in the American project, you know, the spreading of liberty, the military, all that, sure. But what about the QAnon stuff, Jules? I mean, how did Ashley Babbitt end up believing that Democrats are a cabal of Satan-worshipping cannibals running a global pedophile ring and drink the blood of small children to get high off of something called adrenochrome? I mean, certainly there has to be something in addition to everything else, right, that made her go down that path, right? I mean, yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, but what is that extra thing? Is it the pandemic and people in isolation without community? Is it economic anxiety? Was she a believer in the Great Replacement theory? I mean, I can't say for sure. Maybe it's a bit of all that. But whatever mix of things that extra bit is that brought her down the QAnon path, that extra little bit was, maybe it was reality. What I mean is in order for conspiracy theories to thrive, there needs to be a little bit of truth mixed in there. I mean, for instance, reasonable Americans will be the first to tell you that no, the Democrats are not running a pedophile ring out of the basement of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., right? I mean, Comet Ping Pong doesn't even have a basement, so clearly that's debunked. But what about, Jeffrey Epstein and his private jet? How did Epstein commit suicide while being held at the New York Metropolitan Correctional Center, a building that is no doubt very well surveilled and equipped with the staff and manpower to make sure that something like Jeffrey Epstein's suicide just doesn't happen? So you see these sort of kernels of truth within these conspiracy theories, and they're not so easy to argue away. For someone with an incomplete or not a fully developed worldview, political outlook, or command of world history, it seems explaining away reality and the news is more easily accomplished by using conspiracies. I mean, this is how a person gets to a point where they are decoding veiled messages posted to the dark corners of the internet. I mean, people need a way to explain reality to themselves and others. And with these small kernels of truth mixed into a history that contains its own conspiracy theories, I mean, think about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Think about the weapons of mass destruction that were never found, or Building 7 that fell on 9/11, or the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, or what about Operation Paperclip, or COINTELPRO, or even things like the Chicago Police Department killing Fred Hampton, or the New York Police Department having a hand in the assassination of Malcolm X. I mean, all of these quote-unquote conspiracy theories turned out to be true. And when you mix in these kernels of truth with these true conspiracies, it makes it so much easier to believe a nefarious group of individuals are in charge of everything and secretly run the world. And you can do all of this without knowing you've stumbled into an area that's deeply anti-Semitic, deeply reactionary, and you'll never know that you're researching leftover Nazi propaganda, because that's basically what all this stuff is, isn't it? I mean, it's just leftover Nazi propaganda. It's the updated version of the Rothschild conspiracy. I mean, that's what George Soros is. The updated protocols of the Elders of Zion, that's the secret cabal of Jewish people enacting a plan to rule the world. I mean, that's new school. That's the Illuminati. That's that rebranded, isn't it? It's just a little different and updated now. And those notions of a worldwide Jewish movement, a Jewish communist movement, that's just what they mean by globalists now, basically. When conservatives use the word globalist, they're dog whistling to this older theory about a Jewish communist, like a Jewish Bolshevik worldwide conspiracy. So, I mean, how do we reach these people in our society? Should we be attempting to reach them at all? So here to talk to me about all this is, I can't really tell you her name because she's a therapist and she wants to be completely anonymous. And so now this is like the second episode where we've had an anonymous therapist as a guest. And something tells me this might be an ongoing thing. So here to talk about this American psychosis and QAnon and how do you reach these people in your family if you do have them in your family. Here to talk with me about this is an anonymous therapist. Welcome to No Easy Answers. Thanks for being on the show. And this is a really difficult conversation and I want to be careful and frame it correctly so that you know where I'm coming from during this whole conversation. And
Right.
And I think, so just to sort of to frame it in a certain way, I want to say that there's 74 million people who voted for Trump, and there's not all these people are raging sort of conspiracy theory believing, Capitol storming, people. I don't want to go as far as to say that I have anything in agreement with them on ideology or politics or, anything to that end. But I just want to say that there's a very large portion of the country that has voted for a continuation of this thing, of this, that we all largely agree that those that consider ourselves rational and they voted to continue on with this thing. They are largely in approval of things that he did over the course of his administration. But what I'm saying is that I don't want to take the side that we should be writing these people off or that we shouldn't be making outreaches to them. but what's coming up for me is a lot of reasons why they're unreachable, or why it would be futile to sort of attempt at this. And it's really been burdensome. Like, I've been really stewing on this lately, and it's weighed heavily on me. And so I wonder, to start things out, like, I'm wondering, are you writing these people off, or are you not writing these people off? And I wonder, like, has any of that changed since January 6th?
Well, I'm not writing these people off because they're people. But I've also been thinking about this question a lot, and I've been sort of reluctant to share my view especially since January 6th. Before that, I think people on the left were more like thinking about ways that we could reach out, or like there's always a lot of blog posts and stuff about like how to talk to Republicans and
Right.
and stuff like that. But after January 6th, it was like, no, we're not going to try and get along with them. We're going to, I don't know, put them on an ice floe and push them out to sea. It's a lot
Right.
of people, and we can't write off that many people. It's like a quarter of the American population.
Right. It's a ton of people. And I feel like the social fabric is in a shift in such a way that, I mean, and what I mean by that is that these people after January 6th are going to be treated a certain way. And that way might resemble, I don't know, I think maybe we've seen some of this in history with like the Southern resentment after the Civil War, because at this point, I mean, I'm not sure, and we can talk about like if they're deserving of a title like neo-Confederates, or if they are, because what they have tried to do is they've tried to in some way interrupt uh, part of the government. They attempted to some degree a coup or an insurrection, or however we want to call those events. So when I think about this stuff too, I think the social fabric is going to shift, and in that they'll be treated a certain way. And I guess what you're saying is that you've already started to see some of the ways that the social fabric has shifted and they're being treated differently in society.
Yeah, definitely. Um, but I think we're also seeing like a new opening of talking about race and class and all of that stuff in a way that was really kind of hidden before. And it's not all 74 million of them all the same. Like you have the Q people, and then you have more like the big mass
Right,
of
right,
them. And then there's some number that's already, gone away and, left the Republican Party and started maybe not coming over to the left, but, I think some people are feeling politically homeless, or they're thinking, I don't want to be a Democrat. Like I can't be a Republican anymore, but I sure can't be a Democrat. Because
right,
they live in this bubble where they believe certain things about people on the left that really has nothing to do with any of the actual behavior on the left. So maybe we could get them to be socialist.
right. And therein lies a big part of, I think, what should make up a large part of this conversation. Because I think a more robust people's movement would be inclusive of these people, right? Because certainly you can appeal to them and you can appeal to their class interests to a certain degree,
Right. Yeah. And the working
So
class ones, that would be, I mean, those really are our people.
right. And so that's what gets me about it as well, because I can totally sympathize with that point of view, that we have to appeal to class interests, and a more robust people's movement would be comprised of all strides of the working class. And regardless of anything else that goes on, you still share these sort of fundamental things in common with them, like their relationship to the means of production, or their hourly wage, and how they are a wage slave and all they have is to sell their labor. I mean, I get that and I understand that. And I'm open to that, but I'm also, part of me really winces when I hear people make that argument, especially folks on the left, Because, and I've just recently figured out a way to sort of articulate this, but I don't think that there's a political project that they're interested in so much as it's spiritual or cultural projects.
Right.
And so and I've said to people before, I don't think they're social democrats in waiting, meaning that I don't think that if we passed legislation that objectively made their lives better, that they would be any less apt to believe in conspiracy theories or take up these cultural spiritual projects, or they're not, if we can't appeal to them along that very same class interest, right, that shared class interest, if that's not what motivates them, does it make any difference if we did appeal to them along class lines? And that's what really worries me.
Yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about. I'm thinking about the other very poor people. Like, I used to be very poor when I lived in South Carolina, and most of the people around me were, they didn't have time for politics. Like, they're trying to survive, and they're saving up for toilet paper, and like getting food instead of medicine, and all those horrible things. And they're not watching MSNBC. Like, nobody that I was around even cared about the election or Donald Trump or any of that. It just hasn't ever been a concern for them. But maybe if we can lift the bottom half up a little bit, then they would be more interested in what's going on around them.
Yeah, and that's, and even if we have to drag them kicking and screaming the whole way through, I mean, I think that, if we granted them, like, if tomorrow we had Medicare for all and we forgave some student loans, and I don't think that they would be stimulated or invigorated, or I don't think they would be responsive to that sort. I mean, I understand that, like, radicalization comes out of desperation, comes out of oppression, it comes out of hardship, right? um and that's how most of us became leftists, is like we suffered a bit, we were at the bottom of a system that churned out things that weren't in our favor, that had odds stacked against us, and we went through a radicalization process out of desperation, out of oppression, after seeking some form of liberation or a way to untie ourselves from these systems of coercion, right? I get that radicalization comes out of that, but I also feel like if we if we made those conditions like go away, if we gave them Medicare for all, if we forgave student loans, if they had a minimum wage that was decent, I don't think that would, I mean, they would still be radicalized in this socially undesirable way.
You mean like the racism?
Yeah, the racism, the conspiratorial thinking, the Christian dominionship.
Yeah, yeah, and that you can't compromise with that kind of other directed thinking. And I think there's some people that, if they don't understand that you're supposed to love other people and you're supposed to wish other people well, and that life is not about competition, then I don't know.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, part of the reason why I thought it would be cool to talk to you about this was because you're a family therapist. Is that, do I have that right? Right.
Yep.
So I imagine that you have a lot of mediation of tough conversations.
Yes.
And so, if we have people like this in our family, because this is real life shit where families aren't talking to each other anymore, friendships are being
Yeah.
ruined, and it's really difficult to navigate. And so I wonder, um, if as a therapist you would have any sort of advice for people that are trying to make outreach to these people, like, what do
Right.
you
Yeah.
you know
And I was thinking about that, about, trying to find common ground. But if that's your mom or your child, then that's the common ground. And so you have to find a way to connect. And that's going to be really hard for people. And some people are going to need to set boundaries and say, I will talk to you on the phone once a week, but we're not going to talk about any of the conspiracy stuff. So that's one way to do it. I think there's some people that will just say, for my mental health, I just can't be attempting this right now. And they'll kind of put it to the side. So that's another way that you could do it. I would not recommend trying to confront somebody or like convince them, like, here, read this thing, and then you won't believe it anymore, because their belief in this conspiracy theory is something that was arrived at through like a gamification process where they were led along step by step. So it's very, very ingrained in their brains. They've got a lot wrapped up in it.
Right. And that's what we're seeing, kind of, at least, some of the QAnon stuff has unraveled a little bit since Joe Biden was sworn in. And there were a couple different articles that ran. I think Salon ran a piece or something about how some QAnon people are waking up, but others were still, moving the goalpost as kind of like a doomsday cult, that like the world doesn't end. So they just move the date back every time the world doesn't end. And so with some of those people snapping out of it, there was an interesting thing on, I think Anderson Cooper had an interview with a QAnon person that came out of the whole belief system and stuff. And he apologized to Anderson Cooper for thinking that Anderson Cooper ate babies.
I don't think you eat babies anymore.
Jesus fucking Christ, man. Like, I mean, this is what we're dealing with here. And I'm asking you as a therapist, like, how do you communicate with these people? But it's in.
I think we have to leave a bridge, and some of us can be the bridge, and others of us have been too damaged by this type of thing. So that's why I'm trying to be a bridge. But people have to be very careful and intentional in the way that they approach these people, because cults are dangerous. And if it was Nexium or if it was Jonestown or whatever, it's all the same kind of thing. And people could die. I'm pretty worried about the Q thing. I think there's another chapter that's going to unfold.
Right.
And I've been worried about this for a long time. I noticed in like the 90s that the left was not buying guns anymore. Like, guns became bad.
Right.
You're not supposed to have guns. But the Republicans were stockpiling weapons and ammo. So now here we are, like 30 years later, and none of my like hippie friends, they would never have a gun. Like, probably never touched a gun.
Yeah.
That puts us in a difficult position.
I'm near Woodstock, New York, and so there's lots of hippies, but you'd be surprised how much of the right wing the hippies have picked up. Like, when I first moved up here about 10 years ago, it was like, the hippies are into, some conspiratorial thinking. They don't trust the government. And to me, I was kind of like, these guys are a halfway to waving a "don't tread on me" flag kind of thing, So now you see these hippies in Woodstock, where it used to be women that would dress in black, and there were the women in black, and they protested for Palestinian autonomy. And now it's like there's people holding like signs protesting 5G stuff in the middle of town.
Yeah.
So
they
it's
got
wild.
some of the like yoga world, yoga moms and people who buy their stuff at the health food store and mean well, and I think we agree with the Q people on some things. Like, I do think there's a small group of influential people who are running everything. Sure. I don't think that they're eating babies.
Right. I mean, that's to me, I think that where I've gravitated towards when thinking of how do people come so close, but yes, how are they so far off? Like we agree that there's like a small group of people running things that they're not. It's not the Illuminati. It's not like the Council on Foreign Relations. It's it's capitalists.
Right. It's the Koch brothers.
It's the Mercers. It's yeah. So yeah. So I guess we agree with them on certain things, and I get that. But when they fall so far off, like to where it's like, okay, now it's taken on like bits and pieces of like eschatology, I guess, with like
end times.
Good versus evil end times narrative, demons and Democrats eating babies. And I mean, it was shocking like a year and a half ago when I realized that like too many people in this country know what the word adrenochrome means.
Yeah, it's very scary.
Yeah, I mean, and this is shit that like I remember when I was younger listening to like Alex Jones, and he would have someone on like David Icke, and they would talk about like aliens or reptilian overlords or what have you, and I just thought it was like funny and edgy, and that people surely didn't believe this shit, right? And so now it's like they know people really do believe that Democrats were, drinking the blood of babies or eating babies.
They did their research. They know it for a fact because they researched it and found out all about it themselves.
Right. And so I mean, that's a whole other thing that like these people don't occupy the same reality,
Right.
And I'm not even talking about a reality that's as disparate as like watching Rachel Maddow and thinking the Russians colluded and or that Trump colluded with Russia versus watching Hannity and some of his crazy shit that goes on there. This is a totally different, like, this is beyond like even someone thinking of like the Illuminati or something. This is like these people are thinking that the people that are in representative government are consuming babies.
Yeah, like, it's nuts. You have to think, do they really believe this? I mean, some of them must be just kind of going along with it, like they're leaders and stuff, but they're people, just regular people who are so bought into this thing. It's dangerous. I'm worried that something bad is going to happen.
Well, I don't know if we caught that in Buffalo, Minnesota a couple days ago. There was a guy who he basically shot up a business and he had planted a few homemade bombs. And I say a few, like 4 or 5 bombs, and shit like this is not even making the news at this point.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. There's probably a lot of people thinking about mass shootings and
I mean, and even like the Christmas Day Nashville bombing thing that was, the whole country just sort of shrugged its shoulders at. I mean, I think that we're looking at, something similar to like another Oklahoma City happening or something.
right.
Yeah. So, I mean, these people don't occupy the same reality with us. It's difficult to even like, how do you even reach out and find common ground with someone who doesn't even share the same reality with you, or someone that, I mean, I don't even understand if they realize how deeply anti-Semitic like the whole QAnon thing is, because and I say that because when they talk about Democrats eating babies, and it goes back to like the blood libel stuff.
Yeah, and I think most of it does have that. I don't know if there's any Q people who don't hate Jewish people and Black people.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's obviously anti-blackness that goes really deep within that stuff too. I mean, all conspiracy theories at some point go back to anti-Semitism or anti-blackness. I mean, it's like it's all just so deeply rooted in it that it's inextricable.
Yeah, it could be anything that divides people.
So, But yeah, so I don't know, man. I've been chewing on this question for a little bit, and it's been weighing on my head because I really don't know of any way to reach out on anything in common with these folks. I mean, thankfully, I don't have anybody in my family but I that is actively believing in this stuff. So I've been
That's
fortunate
good.
in that. Yeah, and this conversation is not really even for me. It's like I'm trying to figure it out and thinking about it from the perspective of someone that may be wanting to make outreach to their parents or something, because you don't stop
Yeah.
loving your parents when they
Yeah.
fall into this stuff. And I think you and I are both familiar with the Reddit never ending story after
Hmm.
story of the QAnon
Yeah. And
casualties.
the casualties. But this has been happening for a while. There's a documentary called The Brainwashing of My Dad
Ooh,
that's about this girl's father going deeper and deeper into the Fox News rabbit hole. And it really helps you see kind of how that happened and how helpless they were. But she does kind of get him to come around. And I think what we're telling people is you have to be compassionate and you have to be patient. So you would try to not engage with them on the Q material. Like, Mom, I'm not going to talk to you about the lizard people,
right, right.
but we can talk about the kids and we can connect in all the other ways, and set the boundaries. So, you don't want to put anybody in danger or anything like that. But as much as you can, just reach out and try and engage them on topics that have nothing to do with Q, and just be kind of open. Because at some point, they're going to have, hopefully, they will have a second thought and something will happen. They'll think, wait a minute, maybe this is all a bunch of shit. When they get to that point that they're ready to leave, if people are saying, no, you're an asshole, you're a racist, you believe that shit, you can just go somewhere else, then that person is in danger. But it's up to each individual person, to say, is this relationship worth it to me? And I think a lot of people will say, no, I've been through too much. I cannot take any more of this trauma, either right now or in the future, maybe later. But for now, I need to take care of myself and I don't have it to give. But I
Yeah,
think there does need to be we've got to have some kind of truth and reconciliation process around racism in this country.
right. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a terrible question, but I mean, are these people deserving of our sympathy? Because I've sort of struggled with that
What
myself,
do you mean by deserving, Jules?
which is an awful thing, and I feel terrible to even. So what I mean by that is that, like, there's a clear cut way that society treats different types of people, right? So like if you died for a just cause or protesting for a just cause or something, society kind of lifts you up. And if you die in service of trying to replace a democratic government with a fascist or racist alternative, then we treat you like a neo Confederate, or like someone that was seditious. and
Like a
and
death penalty case?
well, I'm not saying a death penalty, but I'm saying that society clearly treats those people differently. And so I mean, I know that if the Democrats had it tried to overthrow the certification of a
Oh my
Republican
God, there'd
president,
been blood running in the streets.
and they wouldn't even be questioning if we were deserving of sympathy, you
No,
know. So
no.
it's, I mean, and for me on so many levels, because I study, you know, not that I study them, but I like researching conservatism. I like going
Hmm.
back and watching old, like, William Buckley shit, because it's like I want to know, like, who these people are.
Yeah,
And
how did
I
we get here?
yeah, and I want to know, like, when they posit an idea or where they frame an argument. I kind of want to know the ins and outs of that, so I'm prepared for that shit too. So, um, but yeah,
I think at some point the Republican Party said we're going to start lying to our base, and they set out on kind of an intentional program of tricking people into wanting policies that were not in their best interest.
yeah, I mean, what comes up for me when you say it is like stuff in the '90s, man. Just like um, the person that the man who raised me. I don't call him my father because he's not. He wasn't even related to him. But the guy who raised me, his dad, was a guy that would sit there reading Art of the Deal and listening to Rush Limbaugh. And so he had what, looking back on now, were like nationalist sort of ideas. Kind of. And I don't think that he was ever thinking that he was coming from any place that was racist or white supremacist or bigoted. I think he was just trying to be patriotic and care about his country and some vague ideas about how an economy should run. But I think all of that somewhere along the way with like University of Chicago or something, it turned into this sort of
Ayn
uh,
Rand.
yeah, like this toxic individualism that ultimately blames the poor for their poverty, or ascribes poverty into their way of being, like describes it into who they are,
And
or
it's crazy because they took Christianity and hijacked it, because Jesus would not shut up about the poor. He's all
sure.
about feed these people. So the fact that the evangelicals have been able to turn all of Christianity to their project of hatred and greed, that's pretty impressive.
Well, I think part of evangelical sort of their way of living comports nicely with like the sort of QAnon cult things, like the sort of insular nature of the cult, where the people who have the Q drops on the inside know and everybody else doesn't know. And then you get your information from people on the inside, and that invalidates any other information that contradicts that from the outside. The sort of cultish thing that QAnon has is even their
It's
Pledge of Allegiance. It corresponds nicely with sort of the way evangelicals save you and keep you within their community and create this insular
Yeah,
environment.
they do a lot of the same things too, like love bombing.
Right.
When you first hook up with them, then people are going to be super friendly to you, seek you out. You're going to be like, oh my God, these are the nicest people I've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And once that happens, once you're kind of hooked into relationships, then you're going to go along with that. Like, no, if it's lizard people or whatever, because most people are incredibly lonely and hungry for connection,
Mm-hmm.
attention, and affection. And when they find that, they latch onto it. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the lizard people and eating babies, and these are my friends.
Right. Right. Yeah. When I've heard some apostate folks talk about what they miss about the church, it's not a belief system. It's not the Bible. It's not anything like that. It's just the community aspect that they
Yeah,
miss.
it's the
Um,
people. And have you ever read the book Bowling Alone?
no.
I forget the author's name, but he was a sociologist, I think, but it was an exploration of how American civic life had dwindled
Mm.
with the oncoming of like television. And we all went into our little boxes,
Oh
and
wow.
there was no more bowling leagues, there's no more Rotary Club. People don't get together and form communities in the same way that they used to, and church is a really good way of doing that. It just became, for me, it became so toxic
Right.
about 20 years ago, when they're really picking up this hatred towards abortion and LGBTQ people. Like I could not be down with that.
Right.
And it's been very strange to see American Christians turn into these greedy monsters. It's such a grift.
Yeah, it's it's fucking like mental terrorism too, in a way, because I mean, you go to church and you're there, then people go, at least on the Protestant side, like I was involved with like Southern Baptist shit when I was younger, um, and so they preach fire and brimstone, people go and crawl up on the altar, on the steps or whatever, and so maybe you feel pressure to do that, and then you go and you do that one day, and then they're like, all right, I did it. And you're like, what do I do now? I was like, I don't know, fucking go home. Church is over. I mean, what do you do after that? Um, so yeah, there's just so much about this, which is, uh, it's complex and it's heavy and it's weighed on my head. Like, are they deserving of sympathy? Like, I feel bad that I even
Well, I think
have
for
asked that,
you, that the answer is no. But for me, I kind of feel like this is my work. I'm a white Southerner and middle-aged, and it was my people who caused this problem or exacerbated
Mhm.
this problem, and I feel a responsibility to help to fix it. And I always have, even before I got radicalized. The racism just seemed crazy to me. It's like hating only gray cats. It doesn't make sense. But I
Right.
remember being raised and thinking that we were literally like two different kind of animals.
Right.
And that's so fucked up. Oh my God.
I think it hit me at one point when I realized that, um, that for white people you can talk about race, but the only time that like race comes up is when you're talking about race, um, because you can ignore it, you turn it off, but race is on all the time for other people, and so that that was particularly impactful when somebody placed it to me that way. Um, but that's really interesting um, that you consider that your work as like a white Southerner. Not that you're in the South anymore, but that like it's your people that
Yeah, it's going to be hard to do that work from way over here. But there are plenty of racists right here where I am, too. I
Right,
think they're everywhere.
right. I used to when I was in high school, I really loved American literature, and I almost like wanted to major in like American literature, and specifically like stuff like Faulkner and like stuff about the antebellum South. And uh and I remember reading once that like being a Southern author was knowing and acknowledging the sort of moral shortcomings of the South, and still yet having optimism towards believing that it could be rectified, or the South could transform itself or change, or
Yeah. And it's
um
it's a cognitive dissonance that I think has really fucked up white people, at least in the South, because oppression is, of course, it's terrible for the victims, but it's not good for the perpetrators either. And I think, Germany has had to deal with that. And in the South, we didn't do that.
right.
And so it's just still there. John Stewart calls it a wound that is never healed.
Right. Yeah, I was just talking to somebody else about about how the price for hating somebody else is loving yourself less.
Yeah.
I think it was James Baldwin that said that. He also said something about like, look in the eyes of an Alabama sheriff and you'll see the sort of pain and stuff that hatred or hating causes, Um, and yeah, I do think there is some cognitive dissonance there because, um, the South has all the makings of like a mini fascist movement within itself, right? It has the the history where they fell from grace and they're always trying to regain that sort of lost perceived greatness. you might say, um, that alone right there is like one of the main qualifications of what fascism is like looking to the past to and some sort of disgrace or embarrassment or thing that happened that they have to overcome and restore greatness. I mean, that's just like built into what the South is. And they have a history of grievances after the end of the Civil War that started with the establishment of national cemeteries. The fact that the Union tried to, unearth and rebury Union soldiers, but not, Confederate soldiers immediately following the end of the war, was met with a lot of side eye from, the South at that time. I mean, they have been embittered about their loss in the war and about the continued sort of short end of the stick they feel they've received. So I get that. Which is why I feel like, the whole QAnon people at this point that have tried to raid the Capitol, like, are they deserving of the same sort of ire? Are they deserving of being classified as like neo-Confederates? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think they are. And, I think that they're criminals. Um, but then I'm also an abolitionist and
right,
I would like to end prison. So I don't know if I want them locked up. It's
right,
very, I
right,
think that's why people are comparing it to 9/11 because we're having those same kind of feelings of like you came into my house and you took a shit on my great grandmother's portrait.
right, right.
It seems unforgivable, and it's just so shocking and traumatic, and the way it's being handled now. um I think the Republicans are trying to pretend like what happened didn't happen. It's not a good look.
Yeah, I mean, and so when I say like, are they deserving of that are they criminals or what have you? It's like, I mean, just to sort of, in a way, it's like, I mean, they didn't occupy the building for days. They didn't. There were no elected officials killed. There were no.
They didn't have any demands. We'd have been in
Right,
there with like,
right,
here's
right,
what we
right.
want. We're not coming out of
Yeah.
here.
Like if communists had did this, of course, like, there'd be a list of demands, there would have been a whole strategy in place. And yeah, like it would have been a completely different
And I was
story.
kind of jealous in a way on the day when it was happening. And then when they just got in there and they kind of milled around, they clearly didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
Um, I was like, that could have been us.
Yeah, yeah. It reminded me of like the bird sanctuary thing out in Oregon, with Ammon Bundy or whatever. Cause, like 2 days after that, they sent I mean, because they occupied that place for like a month, and I don't even know how they did it, but at least they occupied it for more than a day. But when they did that, like a day later, they were like, "Hey, we need some supplies," and they were like, "Send socks and snacks," is what they said in that, which was hilarious at the time. So I thought of it. I was like, "Man, this is like some Al Qaeda stuff going on here."
But they sent
Um,
them dildos. Like people,
right, right.
they got tons of dildos while they were out there.
Yeah, and somebody also bought like a 55-gallon drum of like jelly, like lubricant, and sent it to him as well. I remember seeing that on Reddit at the time, and yeah, it crazy stuff like that happened when they occupied that building. And so there was not a plan among them or anything like that. But I also think that part of the way that like fascism goes, the way it promulgates itself is through a bit of cover with like comedic sort of overlays, like that the fact that Trump is kind of like a clown, but he's not actually what an evil dictator would look like, works in his favor. The fact that there's like, I mean, fascists used humor as a way to like test the grounds of like, hey, here's a terrible, awful, bigoted idea. Oh, I was just kidding. And then so they encroach upon that until they can normalize it. So seeing someone like the QAnon shaman, or seeing that a guy with his feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk, or anything else like that that was almost comical at times, was like, I mean, it's really more scary, it's than what it seems, because
Yeah, I think a lot of people were just kind of wound up and let go.
yeah,
And so they went into the building, but they thought that's what we do when we have an anti-war march. They
right.
just thought that was a protest. But then there was a few people, I think, that did have plans and did try to do more, and we're just lucky that it wasn't much worse.
Here's the thing about that, though, man, which I was going to say, is that one of my family members, and I won't say who, when I asked them what their thoughts were about this, about the events of January 6th, they were like, I was glad. Um, and they're not a Trump supporter, they're not a Biden supporter, they're largely apolitical. So it was really surprising to hear them say that they were glad to see these people hiding under their desks or in their office, or at least quivering in fear. Um, and they were happy about that.
Yeah, I feel that. I mean,
Yeah,
even if they're not political, they're aware that they know they're being fucked over. They know life is not supposed to be this way. And
right.
a lot of people blame our leaders. And that's also been part of the conservative project, is to make people turn away from politics. And they've been really successful with that too.
Yeah, it people are responding to Republicans out of a cultural or spiritual or just sort of gut instinct. They're responding on an emotional level. It's so wild how, like, the fuck your feelings and facts don't care about your feelings crowd is largely just responsive towards emotional invigoration. Like, uh it's a largely spiritual or cultural project they're pursuing. It's not anything like, I mean, I don't know any, I mean, after tax breaks, I don't know what conservatives are
Well,
fighting for,
some of it is hatred for liberals. That's like a big
Right,
major part of it.
right.
Um, and the things that they believe about people on the left have no resemblance to what's actually going on. And there's this whole terrorist organization called BLM/Antifa that they're terrified of, and it's does not exist in the way that they're thinking about it. But they're ready to take to the streets, armed to the teeth, to wipe out these leftists.
Yeah, there's so much dissonance there. There's so much dissonance, like, starting with Ronald Reagan's, like, uh, you know, more government isn't the problem, the government itself is the problem, kind of thing. It's like, well, what is it you're trying to just, if government is the problem, and you can't, how do you, I mean, the dissonance there, that is what I'm, everything from, like, the blue lives matter, but don't tread on me, don't take my guns. It's like, who do you think's going to come take the guns? Like, how are you so patriotic about a government you think that's the problem? And who are you stockpiling guns against? The government you don't trust, or the government you're trying to overthrow, or the government that you're so patriotic about? It's like, it's just laced with this incoherence, uh, which is partly supportive of what I've been trying to say this whole time, is that, contradictions in thought, uh, and cognitive dissonance don't phase these people, because it's not anything political or coherent that they're after. They're after a sort of spiritual gut feeling thing that is emotional more than anything, or appeals to their um, Christian sensibilities, or their um, and white supremacy co-opting so many different movements, like even the Save the Children shit was just, it's like they co-op fighting drugs, they co-op saving children. They it goes all the way back to like the moral panics of the 80s with the Satanism, the satanic panic shit, and the stranger danger. It's like there's so much cognitive dissonance on the right that if we're trying to reach out to these people, it kind of serves us well to understand that cognitive dissonance and contradicting notions don't phase the workings of the minds of someone like these people that we're describing.
Well, are they any different than some of the liberals that is that not
Right.
another silo that has its own thing?
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that is another silo, and you're right, but I think someone who would like be siloed in the liberal camp that believes in this sort of uh, progressive march ever moving forward sort of liberal project of democracy and a diversity, but maybe not having a fully understood concept of imperialism or of
Yeah,
anti-capitalism. Like I think you could still talk to those people about why they need to be anti-capitalist. You can still talk to liberals about why they need to oppose US imperialism or
right.
general malfeasance abroad. But
They have a better understanding.
even if they don't understand why liberals want to diversify everything except for like poverty, right? Like they don't include anti-capitalism. They just within their working model of the world, those that are the poorest still remain those without a voice. There is still a large marginalized community within their ethos, within their structure of how they think government should run, and their outlook on the world is not as robust or as fully developed as people on the left. I totally I get that. But I think you can talk to them. I don't think you can really do that with people that think that Democrats are eating babies.
Well, I think that we would have to shut down the transmitter, like Fox News, and there's that whole like
Right.
media
Right.
that's millions and billions of dollars that's being spent on this, and until that is gone, like we're just shouting into the wind.
Right. Right. There's that meme that like Fox News has done to our parents what our parents thought video games would do to us. I mean, there's shit that's even worse than that now with like OAN and Newsmax.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it's bad.
I mean, these folks are airing Mike Lindell, the Pillow Guy's documentary about this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but I think
Sure, yeah,
the second Bush was president,
right,
and one of his staffers said, "You're in the reality-based community. We create reality when we act, and then you report on it." And I think that was like they think that everything is bullshit, so that their belief system doesn't make sense. It doesn't phase them because everything is bullshit. If nothing matters, then nothing matters.
right, right. And I guess to that end, if nothing matters, like it takes someone, a particular type of person, to buy into a narrative and try and forward it, but it takes a totally different type of person to want to willfully destruct or destroy it, I guess. And so you have this sort of people that will take part in voting that buy into that system. I'm not really worried about them. It's like like I don't share the reality that electoral politics with these people is effective, and that's okay. They can still vote and still feel like they're part of a project, and that's okay, right? And I don't necessarily, because we don't share that same reality, it doesn't mean they're any less reachable. And it seems almost unethical on my part to go and discourage them from voting. Like that's one thing that I've never really done, is like encourage people not to vote, because that's one way in society just completely shunned by everybody, liberals included, whatever, right? So But the folks that we're talking about with the QAnon, with the Christian dominionship, um, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, Proud Boys, um,
Yeah, Nazis, you got to punch the Nazis, I'm afraid.
it's always morally correct to punch Nazis. So, I mean, aside from we're talking about people that we can outreach to, and maybe QAnon people are part of that. Um, but when I sent you over some questions ahead of time about all this stuff, I mentioned this fucking Jimmy Dore thing that happened, and that was crazy to me because you know there is some ideological overlap there, and there can be. There are Nazis that don't hate gay people that still deserve to be punched. You know, but Jimmy Dore brought this guy on this guy from a Boogaloo, from one of the Boogaloo boys, and throughout that interview, he kind of acted surprised whenever the Boogaloo boy said things like, "Hey, we like our LGBT, friends here, and like, hey, we believe in unions, and we believe in, just like shit that like there was
Well,
ideological
I guess
overlap."
Jimmy thinks that they're all exactly the same.
Right, right, and I just, to me, man, I was like, that is so fucking pernicious and terrible because, like, lest we forget that the Boogaloo Boys, that the name comes from, a meme about a second inevitable civil
Yeah,
war,
Civil War too.
Yeah, and the fact that this guy was talking about how he was running security at BLM protests was crazy to me too, because like they're
Yeah,
just clearly just looking for some sort of uh, incident or thing to happen that they can piggyback on with their rifles and shit that they carry.
yeah.
So so yeah, I mean, I think there's and we're just talking about like outreaching to these people, and I don't think the way that, like, I mean, Jimmy Dore obviously did some outreach to these people, and that's terrible. And so I think that, like I said at the top of this, man, I don't want to advocate for not reaching out to these people, but how do we do it? It is
So
just like,
carefully, so very, very carefully.
and I think we have to ask like what they get out of their association with that too, like they get a sense of community, like you were mentioning before, they get
Hmm.
a sense of belonging, a sense of perhaps being embedded within a historical movement.
Right.
Um,
So it
and
would
we,
be better if we could create a situation for our young people where they're not desperate for attention and they're not looking for community because they already have it. Maybe some of those Boogaloo boys are not reachable, and we're just going to have to move on to the next generation and try and keep them from hurting anyone too badly.
yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, how might we live having to share a common social terrain uh, with these people? And,
If they
and
won't change their behavior, then, if they're willing to change their behavior, then who cares? It's all about your behavior. There's no bad people, good people. It's just about what you do. But if people are not willing to change their behavior and they're going to behave in ways that are detrimental to others, then I think we should, you know, maybe lock them up.
yeah, I don't know, man. I just struggle with this shit because I just don't. I mean, to me, it's like I feel like we're gonna walk out in society, and these people are gonna pretend like none of this ever happened.
Yeah, I worry about that too. I remember when after 9/11, people were so anxious to go to war, and everybody, had a fire in their belly, and we rushed into things that turned out to be a bad idea. But at the time, everyone was gung ho. I mean, it was
Yeah,
everybody. And when it turned out that that was a mistake, people just pretended like it had never happened.
right. Yeah, I mean, I was 18, 17 when 9/11 happened. And I remember wanting to join the army, and that's about as
Yeah.
patriotic as I've ever been, at that point.
A lot of
Um,
people did that. I
Yeah.
was working at a high school then. It was a residential school for kids who are gifted in math and science.
Hmm.
And God, it was like the worst, my worst day as a therapist.
Oh my God.
And several of the boys joined up. Right after that, all of the South Asian parents came and got their kids. Like there were hate crimes. And ever since then, it's just been war and more war.
Yeah, you know, the day 9/11 happened, I was in high school, and my last class I had political science with this teacher who was a Vietnam veteran, and the guy had a bit of well, there's no nice way to say it, but part of his arm got blown off in Vietnam, and then it was reattached, but it wasn't like a fully functioning arm. And so anyway, so he would talk and he would move his arms around, and this arm that was attached, but was anyway, it was like this flying thing around the room when he would talk. He would move his arms and talk with his hands, but his hand was limp, and it was really, really. This is what haunts my nightmares at this point, you know. But anyway, so this guy, I mean, it started out in political science class of him like being like, well, if you can't tell if I'm a Democrat or a Republican by the time this class is over, then I've done my job well. And 9/11 that day, it just all went to shit, man. It was like, he was like, this is the war room from now on. He wrote the words war room on the marker board. And that was the
Wow.
day we realized this guy's a warmongering piece of shit, you know. But yeah, so it was. Now I remember that on 9/11. I remember waiting in line for gas, and I remember calling a friend and thinking I should enlist in the army. And yeah,
I'm
what a,
glad you didn't.
you know, I made it as far to sign papers, then I backed out. And
Some of those guys are really fucked up.
yeah, yeah, it's fucked up. It's like I feel like I it took me a few years to understand, but now I understand that I feel like it, the military as a whole, aside from obviously killing people, right? Its main sort of cultural service is like a systematic dehumanization of non-Americans.
Right.
You know,
Is that what you felt? Like a sense of vengeance that you were gonna go and
yeah. I mean, I felt like at the time, I felt like I was um, doing what my country needed, and that was something that preceded any system of ethics. That like any
like a
plans to go
sacred duty?
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And that was because I came from a family that had, you know, a lot of people in the military. My grandfather and his brothers were in all different branches, including the Coast Guard, you know. So it was like, oh, now you all good men must come to the service of their country, you know. And so and you know, at the time, I still believed in all this shit about like, you know, that the forward march of progress, and we're a democracy and we spread democracy. And and it wasn't until a couple of years after that when I realized what a terrible country we were, and then nothing ever got better. You know, we
Hmm.
went from obviously from 9/11 to the recession to 9/11 to Katrina to the recession. You know, it's
Do you still love America in the same way that you did before?
oh no, no, no. I think America doesn't even have the right to exist. I think that we have committed such war crimes and atrocities and use of nuclear weapons, and we continue to, you know, to pillage the global South, and yeah, we're an empire in plain sight, hiding in plain sight, and yeah, I don't
We
believe we
should
have.
break up.
Yeah, like I don't think we have the right to exist after the atrocities we've committed. Um,
Yeah. I think you
so
have a point. It's a lot. But people have no idea about any of that stuff. They're still back where you were before 9/11.
yeah, you know, and I don't know how I came around to like, you know, having Ho Chi Minh as a personal hero. You know, I don't know how I got from A to B, but you know, and that's the thing about like why. All right, so when I tell people that like, hey, you know, I think I'm a communist, you know, and they're like, how the fuck are you? You know, people that respond that way, It's like, bro, this entire country was built on a culture of dissent. Like, how much can you ingrain in the culture that you need to overthrow a tyrannical government before like dissent and sedition, along with free speech, right? It helps out to have free speech, right? So then now you could be dissentful and seditious above board. I mean, uh, uh, this sort of dissent and the thought that you need to overthrow a government in order to restore uh, basic human rights or restore agency or to be free from tyranny, that's baked into American culture.
It's very
So
violent.
it is. The entire culture is violent. And I wonder because I mean, I'll probably do an upcoming show on this with some folks about like how Americans are so like deeply conditioned to rationalize mass death.
right.
It feels like unnecessary death just like doesn't even phase us, from watching people drown in a hurricane in 2005 and Katrina um to seeing like, I mean, all those deaths in Puerto Rico just a couple years ago
Yeah.
with the hurricanes.
For me, it's not just America, it's the whole world. Our system needs to collapse. Like we're not going to slam the brakes on. We're not going to turn this around and combat climate change. That's not going to happen. It's all just going to collapse, and whatever is left, people will have to start over. This is not sustainable.
Yeah, it's definitely like I mean, I wouldn't call myself an accelerationist, but I'm definitely not an optimist as far as how do you turn this around. I think our inertia is too far forward and
I usually don't say it because I want younger people to still have optimism and believe that if they work really hard, they can make a difference.
yeah, I mean, you get to a certain point and you understand that like if that was true, then the hardest working person would be the richest, but it's usually inversely proportionate to,
Mhm.
that. So, and I mean, not to like turn this entire conversation into commiseration, but I it's just, I just keep coming back to this whole topic of like, how do you reach out to these people? And if you can't share class interests with them, or if that is not some underlying motivation for them, I'm hesitant to even try to figure out a way to appeal to them on a cultural or spiritual basis. Like I can't get down with patriotism with them or any sort of I just don't understand what shared grounds do we have to appeal with these people? And I say
Maybe
that
you don't have any grounds. Maybe it's just not work that you're cut out to do. That
I mean
sounded bad.
possibly. No, I mean some people are cut out to do that.
Do you feel like called to work on the anti-fascist project?
Yeah, definitely. Like I've been a person who has been anti-fascist in the past and have, sure. And so, but I guess after January 6th, or at least I guess what it's come down to is that I've had some recent conversations and I've started to look into some of the work of I think his name is Jacques Rancière, or at least Rancière is his name, and he's just like a radical egalitarian thinker that like so many things can exist over the top of each other. We can reconcile so many different things if we understand the fundamental animating principle of so much of what people do more broadly on the left is equality, is equity, is just this sort of thing that whether we're working on mutual aid, whether we're working on grassroots, or whether we're working to forward a revolution, it's all this underlying equality that we're looking for.
And
And I
that's
think,
that's God's work, all of the mutual aid and all of that stuff where we're reaching out to other people in our community. That's
yeah,
what's really important.
and it's almost like I know these people are suffering. I know that the term economic anxiety is used in an increasingly pejorative sort of way at this point. Like economic anxiety, my ass, you motherfuckers are racist, sort of thing. So I get that these people are, some of them are in line at food banks. Some of them are suffering. Some of them are suffering from a very real economic anxiety. But I also know that some of these people own $5,000 tactical rifles, and that's not,
That's not,
proletariat sort of
no.
thing. That's some of these people are showing up at capitals with rifles, driving 2019, 2020 Dodge Ram pickups.
Some of them are dangerous and should not be approached.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a really scary thing to think about. And I think of fascism as like this living, breathing, shifting, adapting, insidious sort of system, because it's not going to show up looking like Mussolini in the year 2020, it's going to look different every time, because that's what fascism does. And so I think that there's a whole lot of fascism built into these movements, whether we're talking, I don't even have to bring up the 3%ers or Oath Keepers or Boogaloo Boys or Proud Boys or any of that stuff. But there's an inherent sort of scarier fascism to me built into the Trump Christian Dominionists and the QAnon people. That's scarier than any sort of loosely regulated militia types that the others are.
Yeah, it's really scary. And the Dominionists have been on this track for a while. And they have like a completely different end game in mind that is not compatible with anything that I would consider to be ways that I would want my country to go.
Yeah. As much as I say that, the United States doesn't have a right to exist, I live in this country and I see what's going on. And one thing that I don't want it to, I don't know, man, part of me is still offended and affronted by these groups and things they've done, not in any way that they've like, I don't know, stained or, the fucking sacredness of the House of Representatives or something like that, or the Senate floor. There's no sanctity in any of that shit for me. But it's part of me still.
They are offensive. And at that basic level of, I believe deeply in the egalitarian thing that everyone is equal and that's the sacred thing. And so when you go using violence to prove that some people are better than each other, you've crossed the line.
Yeah, I definitely think that like they were not they were protesting and fighting for the continuance of a sort of privilege, I think, a sort of socially a hierarchical sort of position.
Yeah, that they're
I
like
feel.
nobility, that they're above the rest of us.
Right. To a large degree, I feel like sometimes like this is just the petty bourgeois fighting with the big bourgeois, and maybe we should stay out of that and let them fight it themselves. But you see that they, like there's not, I don't know how many people have been arrested after this thing now, but I know at the time it didn't seem like very many people were arrested.
No, and when I think about the George Floyd protests and how many people got arrested last summer, they really can't arrest enough of them unless they arrested all of them. It's just really disgusting to see white men get away with shit. And, it's not a surprise. I've been observing this for 51 years now, but it still pisses me off. And I hope that maybe now everybody's had enough of this bullshit